I would like to do is, of course, go through the scriptures and look at what's been taking place over the last 5 or 6 weeks, no more. Yes, some of the verses or some of the quotes I'll give you from newspapers might be outside of that period, but dominantly it's what's happened in the last few weeks that we're going to be looking at. But first of all, let's remind ourselves, but what that states to us is this, that we are called on to watch, brethren and sisters, in all the key quotes that relate to our day. Now, in the tail end of the Olivet prophecies, in Matthew chapter 24 and Matthew chapter 25, Mark 13 and so on, when he's talking of our day, he says, watch. Again in Paul, when he's talking about having talked about the resurrection, he goes on into chapter 5 and he tells us to watch. And of course in Revelation 16, the next verse speaks of Armageddon. He tells us just before that, watch. Now that has always moved me particularly, because I've always seen that as a critical thing for us in the last days. The key exhortation is watch. Well, brothers and sisters, I believe the time is very short, indeed, exceedingly short. Every sign of Christ's imminent return seems to have moved ahead in the last few weeks. Therefore, it may well be that the Lord's coming is very, very soon. Now, we all know this quote very well. Brother Thomas said, when Russia makes its grand move for the building up of its image empire, let the reader know that the end of all things is at hand. The long-expected but stealthy advent of the King of Israel will be on the eve of becoming a fact. We know that well. And brethren and sisters, as we know, we can see into that area. There's Russia, there's the Ukraine area, and that Ukraine area we know from Scripture, and we know also from Brother Thomas's words, has to be occupied. It is the capital of once the area of Rosh, and then of course he must move into Europe, Turkey, and then into the Middle East. We know that off by heart. We've heard of that thousands of times. But brethren and sisters, look what's happening now. Go back a year, things changed dramatically in Ukraine. The biggest transit area for oil and natural gas from Russia into Europe suddenly found massive quantities of oil and natural gas. It was going to take a few years to develop. I don't believe it has even started because of the chaos. Russia immediately began to move. It knew that if it didn't take control of that area soon, that area would supply Europe and cut them off from the market. So they had to move. And of course, as we know, March the 25th, they had the Crimean Peninsula. We remember the details of how that took place. But Russia began to move. And with Russia beginning to move, it then sent or stimulated the rebels in the area of eastern Ukraine, that area that is dominantly controlled by people who speak Russian. They stimulated them, stirred them up so that they stood up against the Ukrainians. And so at least 10 of the East Ukrainian towns were taken over by these rebels. Have a look at the clothes they're wearing. You don't have them under your bed. Where do you get them from? Where did they get it from? I believe from Russia. They had high-grade weaponry. Look at this. Okay, handguns, but you don't normally hold that. Where do they get it from? Russia. Russia was provoking that situation right from the beginning. And then, of course, Russian military equipment, reinforcements, flowed across the border into Ukraine. Now I'm sweeping through this very quickly. Russian soldiers moved in. And here we can see some of the pictures that we've seen on the web. Coming across to the borders of Russia, loaded upon the borders of Ukraine, loaded upon trains, was tank after tank after tank. In they came into the area of eastern Ukraine. Here we see the humanitarian convoy to come into that area. And here are some of the tanks in Ukraine itself. So Russian troops have moved in. They moved into these areas here. They've taken control of some of the cities. And that is the situation we see at the moment. Over 2,000 lives have already been lost in the chaos and the fighting that's going on. But let's summarise that briefly. So, Putin demands the Ukraine remains in the Russian Euro Union. The leader of Ukraine went across to Russia and he agreed to do that. When he came back home, the area of the capital city, Kyiv, was racked by protests. At one point, 500,000 on the streets through the middle of their winter, protesting and protesting for day after day. And finally they said, all right, we'll join the EU. Ukraine's love for the EU. It didn't want to be bound to Russia anymore. And so now, what did Russia do? The bear was let out. Crimea was occupied. Rebels take over part of eastern Ukraine. Russia moves in with troops and weapons, and fighting has escalated. So where's the scene now? Ask the expert. What does he tell us? European leaders warn Russian invasion of eastern Ukraine at a point of no return. That's how they see it. And they see that Russia is at a state of war against Ukraine, and it could spread to the whole of Europe. They are terrified of what this fella's up to. And so they said, back out. We're going to bring weapons in. We're going to fight on Ukraine's side. And his comment was very simple. Vladimir Putin said, look at the date, just over a week ago, don't mess with nuclear Russia. We've got now more nuclear weapons than America, and that's true. And so he tells them that Russia is one of the leading nuclear powers, and it certainly is. It's best not to mess with us. Back off. But he didn't stop there. They've now brought up to the borders, they claim, 45,000 troops, 160 tanks, 350 artillery, 140 armed vehicles. Things are moving dramatically. Do we expect that? Of course we do. Look at this. It's one of the most familiar verses we've got, that we know, don't we? Go to the land of Magog, prince of Rosh, Meshech and Tubal. He's moving in. The area of Russia is moving into what was once part of Russia, which was once at one point the capital of Rosh, Kyiv. But things haven't stopped there. You see, he's working by certain tactics. Look at his tactics. What's he done? Russian aid. Here they are, a convoy of 242, I think it was, doesn't matter, something of that nature, of vehicles coming to the border. Here it was, maybe about 3 weeks ago, and they called it a Trojan horse. Goodness me, the Trojan horse came from that area, the area of Troy. Do you remember what took place? The city of Troy fell. They made this horse and put it outside the walls, and the people dragged it in, not knowing that inside were soldiers. And in the night they got out, opened the gates of the city, and Troy fell, didn't it? So here's the Trojan horse. That's as they see it. And what happened was, he brought it up to the border, and they said, we want to check them all out. He quickly shifted it. They said, where is it? And next thing, the bulk of them were inside Ukraine. And probably what they did was bring in many of their troops, hidden inside those trucks. Somebody did inspect some of those trucks, and they said they've got hardly anything in them. No humanitarian aid of any consequence. What was it there for? Trojan horse. And so it brought, it seems, troops into that area of Ukraine. Russian troops. So by cunning, by craftiness, he's operating. Now he says to them, I'm ready to have a state developed here, an independent state. Doesn't have to be pro-Russian, doesn't have to be controlled by Russian. Statehood is the term he used. And so he raises this issue there. And then he says, as well as that, I want peace. I want peace. Here's 7 steps you can do, and if you do that, we'll have peace. Cunning, false words are what he is saying, and the world knows it. The North Atlantic Treaty Organisation. Cameron said, think about that. Do you remember? And Cameron went over and he saw Hitler. Sorry, let me say that again. Cameron said, remember what took place in the Second World War? Chamberlain, the Prime Minister, went over to see Hitler. Came home and said, peace in our time. He was deceived by the lies of Hitler. And he's saying, you're hearing the lies from Putin. Be careful, be careful. They had a big meeting in Wales only about a week ago. And people came out from that. And they weren't determined as Britain wanted them to be. We'll see that in a minute. You can see, he's whistling. Yeah, no big problem for me. What's going on there? And so we could rename NATO. Or better, no tough action taken organisation. That's my description of it. Doesn't ring quite true, but there we are. That's exactly what's happening. They're not coming out resolute. Now, brothers and sisters, what do you expect Russia to do? What do you expect Mr. Putin to do? Here's what the Bible told us he'd do. And in the latter time, our days, a king of fierce countenance, I believe Putin, shall stand up, and through his policy also he caused craft, deceit. Remember the Trojan horse vehicles? Lies. I'll give them statehood. Lies. Deceit to succeed. And in his hand he shall magnify himself in his heart. And by peace, here's my steps to peace. You follow these and it'll be all over. And NATO, part of them are deceived by his treachery. Exactly as we would expect. Exactly what the scriptures have said. Thousands of years ago. It's stunning. But look at this. What about Germany? What about Russia at the moment? Well, Russia's economy is in a mess. Why? Well, if you'd invested in Russia and you saw this going on, what would you do? I'd pull my money out straight away, wouldn't you? That's what the businessmen are doing. They pulled out already, and this is a little while back, so it's probably twice as much as that. 75 billion out of Russia, pulling it out fast. The exchange rate is plummeting. The economy is in a mess. They're flirting with recession. Inflation's hit 7.8%, and it's even higher now. Interest rates, they've had to raise it to try and keep the money home in Russia. Russia's in a mess. Is she worried? And it could be worse than that soon. Cameron, look at the date a week ago. He could see that he wasn't getting the resolute support from NATO. So what did he say? Well, we control the city of London. Money. We will permanently damage Russia's economy. That's what we'll do. We'll permanently damage it. We'll do sanctions and such like on her that will harm her. And so the hook is going into the jaws. Russia cannot wait. The longer she waits, the worse her economy will be. She's got to move swiftly. It's going to get worse and worse the longer she fritters away the time and doesn't act. So the hooks are in the jaws. She's got to move swiftly. And brethren and sisters, just stop for a moment. She anticipated this a little. Some months ago, she began to establish a new financial structure that's not based upon the American dollar, the international exchange rate, or international currency. She's putting up a new one based on the ruble, her currency, linked with the Chinese currency, the yuan. And she is beginning to establish that and calling upon various countries affiliated with her not to use the American dollar but use her currency. So there's a new financial infrastructure being set up by her. But look at this. What about the boycotts? Here you are, Germany. German businesses urge halt on sanctions. Don't sanction Russia, says the business people in Germany. Why? It's madness to say that, isn't it? No, they say, you've got to stop that, Mrs. Merkel. Don't oppose Russia. Why? Well, what he's saying, look, we've got huge amounts of money invested in Russia. Here's a list of the biggest companies and what they're going to lose. They are 1,095 billion if Russia cuts them off, right through to 1,300 billion. Staggering amounts. Germany is in a position she's going to lose terribly if she boycotts Russia. And our businessmen are telling Mrs. Merkel our GDP will go from positive to negative. Our exports will go into the negative. We'll have to import more than we export. And our unemployment's going to rocket to 300,000 in a blink. And so they're backing quietly back a little. The situation is very, very tricky indeed. Does it surprise us? Gog of the land of Mayor, Germany, is going to be with him in the end? No surprise at all, is it? No surprise at all. It's exactly what you'd expect. And look, we can see why it's going down that path. Now look at France. France has built a whole lot of these ships for Russia. The first ones come off the slips. The Russian sailors are over there to pick it up. And a week ago they said you can have it. But after Wales they're a bit questioning now and saying no, no, no. France halts delivery of these warships to Russia. About face has taken place, gone the opposite direction, opposing Russia. That's strange, or is it? I wonder what we should expect. Well, we definitely expect Gomer to be with Russia in the end, don't we? I'll bring thee forth and all thine army and horses. Gomer, which is France, and all his bands, we expect that. But look what Brother Thomas says in Exposition of Daniel. Now, we haven't got time to go into why he said this, but he says this: France will send her conquered and crestfallen host to do battle for the autocrat, that's Russia, against Britain on the mountains of Israel. So what's he saying? He's saying this, that Russia's going to have to come in here and really give France a big shake-up. She will be crestfallen and defeated before she sends her troop down to support the Putin, down to support Russia as it moves into the Middle East. Staggering, isn't it? But let's move on. What about Italy? Look at the date. The Wales conference is over. Finland and Italy choose business partners with Russia. Oppose the new European Union sanctions over events in Ukraine. Moving towards Russia. Now, I caution a little bit, that is a Russian paper. But be that as it may, presumably it's correct. And the new Prime Minister, you probably haven't seen too many pictures of him, but he's very popular. Before he came to Prime Minister, he was a comedian, so little wonder he's popular. Anyhow, but he's being influenced quite a bit by the papacy. And what he said is this: the only answer, he says, is Italy will push for a United States, not of America, of Europe. That's interesting. So he says, we're going to have one body, the EU. No. We're going to have maybe 10 states around here that are united together, which we'll call the United States of Europe. He says that a stronger and more cohesive Europe is the only solution. So if they all go independent but they work together, we'll be financially better off. That's his feelings. And so what do we expect? Exactly what we expect. As the toes of the feet were part of iron, Italy, Italian. So there we are. It's linked to that Roman power of old. There will be units, not one. And that's coming to pass. But let's continue with the papacy for a minute, or religions, shall we? Look at this. Here's Putin, very friendly with the Russian leader at the Eastern Orthodox Church. Very friendly indeed. Here's another one of those key leaders. And these words come from him, and that's why I've got his picture up there. And he says this: more than 25,000 churches have been restored in the past century in Russia, past quarter century in Russia. That is 90 a month. In fact, 3 churches are open every day in the country. In 1988, there were 20 monasteries in Russia. Now there are 805. How's that coming about? This man. He's very religious. He's supporting that. Putin urges Russians to return to the values of religion. So he's very religious indeed. That shouldn't surprise us for 1 second. Look at this. You know, in Ezekiel 38, there's a key word. What's the key word of Ezekiel 38? Company. Company. The word assemble is the verb from which that noun comes. Again there, the verb from which that noun comes. They are cognate related words. It's the Hebrew word kahal. And it has the idea of a religious assembly. It's a religious assembly of nations. Who's blessing them? The Pope and the Eastern Orthodox Church when they come into the Middle East. You know, it's quite interesting because Ezekiel 38 sort of like pops its head up every now and again like a serpent does, and you see it behind the words, the language, the fact that there is a religion behind all this. It's not clearly stated, but it's only seen in the usage of that word. And we're not surprised, are we? Look at what Putin's up to. But look, brethren and sisters, let's move on further. Georgia positions itself in Russian Western standoff. Now, remember 2 Olympic Games ago, Russia moved into Georgia, didn't it? Brutally moved into that area. There it is there. Moved into Georgia and took control of it. Then it backed out under world pressure. And these 2 areas here have been retained by Russia in white, the white areas. The breakaway states, they call them. Okay? But Georgia went for a little while pro-Russian because they're worried about what Russia was up to. And then suddenly moved over and is asked to join the EU. But now they're having second thoughts. However, if the support does not materialise soon, if the EU doesn't come to help Ukraine, they say, well, it's so weak, we can't trust them to help us. Georgia will likely be forced to re-evaluate its troubled relationship with Russia. In other words, it'll flip back and filiate with Russia. Does that surprise us? Brethren and sisters, the house of Tagama of the North Quarters and all his bands will be with Russia. Ezekiel 38, we know it off by heart, don't we? Brother Thomas says Georgia and Circassia probably are the bands of Tagama's house. Circassia is, there's Turkey, but up into this area, a little north of Georgia. Let's go back a bit. There we are, into this area here. And so he says to us that those areas will be linked with Russia. Of course they will. Scripture's told us for many years that they will be. But here's the headlines. We're going back quite a bit now. March the 28th, still this year. Front page of the New Statesman. You've probably seen that. Time to rearm. Time to rearm. The mood in Russia and Moscow turns nasty. Sure does. Sure does. And there's the bear, the Russian bear, looking south. And already it's moving, isn't it, on Ukraine and such like. So, some nations who will be a little bit more realistic than others, what will they do? Joel. Proclaim ye this amongst the nations, prepare war. Stir up the mighty men. Let all the men of war draw near. Let them come. Beat your ploughshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears. Let the weak say, I am strong. Some nations will arm and prepare. But brothers and sisters, go back only a little while ago when there was chaos or troubles in the Gaza Strip in Israel. Right across Europe there were protests. Yes, even in as far as Australia and Britain, but possibly not as strongly as in Europe. Italy, Spain, Poland, Belgium, Sweden, France. Their pictures taken over one weekend when people were rallying in opposition to Israel. It was terrible what was going on. Absolutely staggering. And the following Saturday, this was the scene. Europe's anti-Semitism worse since Hitler. Think of that. They liken it to the day of Crystal Night. That was the day when Hitler approved of them going forth and smashing the Jewish shops and such like. Right across Europe back in 1938. Okay? And then suddenly it was happening again. They needed 1,000 policemen in both Berlin and in Paris to allow the Jews to come home safely from their synagogues on Saturday. Yes, they got home safely, but 8 of the synagogues were burnt. Not burnt down, presumably they put out, but attempted to be burnt. Staggering what was going on. Thousands of officers, police, trying to stop the protest that's going on. Fanatics bent on destabilising their country. Should we be surprised? Look at this. Thus saith the Lord God, it shall come to pass that at the same time thou shalt think an evil thought. We know it's evil. We came along, didn't we, to that Jewish afternoon. We heard of what was going on and how they deal with their enemy. It wasn't like any other nation. Who sends a rocket in, and a dead rocket, so to speak, knocking on the roof, so to speak, to tell the Gazan people to get out before they do destroy the building? Nobody's done that but Israel. And thou shalt come against my people Israel. The hatred that's in their heart will drive them to affiliate themselves with Putin, and they will move into the Middle East ultimately. But what about Britain? We're going back a little bit. Look at it. We're going back about 2 months now, and this man got voted in as the new European Commissioner. Now Britain was aghast. He's a German. His name is Juncker. He's a man who determined to control the European Union. And Britain is not very happy with that, first of all, because he is German. Secondly, because, as Cameron said, he's a liar and a cheat and he's not honest. And he said that in front of the EU Parliament building. He went over and spoke there. And he must have had facts to support that. As well as that, he's a Jesuit. That's something, as far as we're concerned, is a bit of a problem, isn't it? But there we are. He stands for everything Britain hates. Britain's ready to leave. That's what they're thinking. Situations are moving dramatically at that stage. Now put that slightly aside. So she's moving away, it looks, ultimately, from the EU. How quick? We don't know. But it does look like it will be soon. But at the same time, look at this. Cameron's speech to the Knesset. Look at the date. This year he went down and he said his support for Israel was unbreakable. Unbreakable. Does that surprise us? The merchants of Tarshish aren't affiliated with Gog or Europe. Britain is going to break away from that, and the signs are there. But as well as that, what do when Russia comes into the Middle East? They oppose it. They are pro-Israel. They are pro-Israel. Have you come to take a spoil? It's not as strong as it ought to be, but they oppose it. And they're not alone. Look at this. This year, Canadian Prime Minister went over and he spoke in the Knesset. Have a look, the red carpet's out for him. They knew what he was going to say. The place was absolutely chocker as he spoke complimentary words to Israel. They were thrilled with what he said. But he's not the only one who's pro-Israel. I don't know if you know this man, Abbott. There's the day he won his election. There's he's with his family. And his election speech contained these words: "We are firmly committed to restoring the Australian-Israeli friendship to the strength it enjoyed under John Howard's government." We are firmly committed to it. But he's not alone. Here's another man. This man won the biggest election the world has ever seen. Billions voted in India. Only late last year, I think it was. No, it might have been early this year. But anyhow, he's come to power. Won a landslide victory, no doubt about it. India's new Prime Minister touted as Israel's best friend in Southeast Asia, and he says, "I will soon make a trip to Israel. I'm a friend of the Jews." And not only that, the Indian people came to him and said, "Look, we're very worried about the economy of India. We would like it to be a little bit better. What can you do to help it, Mr. Modi? Can you help us? We'd like it to catch up with China." He says, "No problems. No problems." He says, "I will go to Israel and I'll invite many of their businessmen to come over here, set up business in India and show us what to do. And I tell you what, we'll take off." And he's probably right. And so we can see, it's not a big surprise, is it? The merchants at Tarshish with all the young lions thereof, Commonwealth countries. Britain, yes, of course. And Australia. And of course Canada and India. There they are. Fulfilling exactly what we expect. But now, look at this. This is critical. There is the leader of it, Turkey, Mr. Erdogan, right? Turkey threatens to close the Bosporus on the Russian ships, that waterway. Most of the Russian ships are found in there and at Sevastopol. That's their warm water port. If they want to get out and don't want to just sail around the Black Sea, they've got to go through the Bosporus. They've got to have Turkey's permission to do so. They don't ask for it anymore, but if Turkey wanted to close it, it'd be all over, wouldn't it? He said, when they took hold of Crimea, he said, "You look out how you deal with our ethnic Turkish people inside Ukraine and Crimea. They're called the Tatars. If you're cruel to them like you traditionally have been, we will close the Bosphorus to Russian vessels. That's our aim. We will do it. Listen." But the paper article was quite staggered that he wrote that. You do not say that to Putin. They commented that it was a terribly risky comment. And it sure is. Russia will therefore, when it comes, will come through here by ship across there, as we've just read about in Daniel 11, and sweep into that area. Remember, the king of the south shall push at him, then the king of the north shall come against him, Turkey. We've known that for years. That's the power of the Ottoman, based at Constantinople. And he'll come like a whirlwind. Little wonder. With chariots and with horsemen and with many ships. But here's the key thing. Look, this is what Brother Thomas said. I'd like you to look at this green bit down here. Huh? This is what Brother Thomas said. We, brethren and sisters, you do not have to wait the advance of the Russian Gog against Constantinople. What's he talking about? Christ's return. Now, he wasn't dogmatic. He said, it's my personal opinion. But how often has he been right? So his opinion is, we won't see Turkey fall from Australia, but from Israel, from Sinai. Christ's return is almost here. And so we can see that time is running out. We've got to take these words very seriously. Look, brothers and sisters, everything you can think about is moving. You ask me afterwards, see if you can find something I haven't covered that we've expected, that isn't moving quickly in the last 5 or 6 weeks. But now let's look at the Middle East. A lake of fire. It's drawing attention of America away from Russia. Russia's getting a bit of a free hand because of it. Here we can see the ISIS group. It's got all sorts of names, isn't it? ISIL, just IS, but we'll call it ISIS. That is the Islamic group. That Sunni group is now the size of Britain. Look at the date. 5 days ago. What happened? Well, they were fighting over here in Syria against the Assad regime, the leader in Damascus. But somehow they got together, they got their ideas changed, and they went for the idea of terrorism. And so what they did was they swept in through here. And as they came into city after city, people just got up and ran. Terrified. Some of them were soldiers. They chucked off their uniforms, got rid of their guns and ran. But were captured. And the result was terrible. And city after city of the Iraqi area is terrified as these powers move through almost to the borders of Baghdad. Al-Maliki, the leader of Baghdad, appealed to America. America said, forget it. You've had many years we've asked you to do what we wanted to. No, we're not listening. They appealed to Iran. Iran said, yes, we'll help. But it didn't come in big numbers. So they said to Russia. And Russia swept in with equipment in a blink. Helicopters were coming in, planes were coming in. And Al-Maliki, who's now stood down, and the next man has taken over, Mr. Heidi al-Badid, or something of that nature. Can't quite remember his name, but he's taken over. He's now using Russian equipment. And they've kept the ISIS back from Baghdad. But look, brothers and sisters, that situation is quite a dangerous one. Look at this. The most deadly Middle East conflict is Shia versus Sunni. One Muslim group against the other Muslim group. Two basic Muslim groups, aren't they? The Shia and the Sunni. And it is a deadly, unsolved conflict that's been going on for hundreds of years between the two Muslim groups. But what should we expect? Well, let's listen to Dr. Thomas for a moment. This is what he had to say. The Shiites of Persia and the Sunnis, now remember Persia incorporated Syria, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan. So it's broadly what we're looking at. The Shiites and the Sunnis will hate each other with a hatred not exceeded by the Orange men and the Romanists of Ireland. That's the Protestant, the Catholics. They hated each other, didn't they? They blew each other up 20 years ago, 30 years ago. He says it'll be the same. Be the same. And Persia, particularly there, talking of Iran, will be led to indulge in dreams of extending her frontiers in the direction of Baghdad. So Iran will say, yeah, we'll get control of it ultimately. How? By the aid of Russia. By the aid of Russia. Absolutely on the dot. Absolutely correct. In every sense of the word. That's what we're seeing. And it shouldn't surprise us. All of them handling swords. Persia, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan. They will be there and affiliated with Russia. Who's helping the most? Russia so far. Staggering. But brothers and sisters, it's scary. Look at this. Thousands of Al-Qaeda terrorists are on the loose in USA and Europe. Who's saying that? Israel. Oh, a couple of months ago. Nobody listened. Nobody listened. They said 11,000 Islamic terrorists, 11,000 of them, are on a constant commute between the Middle East and North Africa and Europe, primed for lethal action. Never has the West seen the likes of terrorist army on this scale. Israel. So let's come forward a month and a half. Reuters. The Islamic war to the US. We will drown you in blood. And they're showing examples of it. People being beheaded and all sorts. Horrifying pictures. Thing is looking frightening. Here's the leader of Saudi Arabia. There he is, King Abdul. And he had got information, credible information, has reached Saudi Arabia, Britain and Australia about the Al-Qaeda operations within that Sunni group, that ISIS group. And what they are saying is they're going to coordinate a terrorist attack. He thinks tomorrow, September 11. I'll be staggered if they do that, because everybody would expect it, wouldn't they? But what did he say? He said, I am certain that after a month the terrorists will reach Europe, and another month, America. Head of Saudi Arabia. Does he know something? Is he right? Well, time's going to tell. Time's going to tell. But look at this. And there shall be upon the earth distress of nations with perplexity. No way out. Men's hearts failing them for fear. It's terrifying what you're seeing out there. That is what he is saying. And it really is frightening to look at what could happen. Australia yesterday went on to a higher level, an extreme level of alertness. Mr Abbott has said we're not going to have some of these Islamic people coming into Australia. We'll cancel their passports. We're putting people at the airport checking people out if they think they're going across there to join that mob. In Iraq we will stop them. Things are looking extremely serious. Britain has gone to the highest state of alert. Highest state of alert. It's taking it very seriously indeed. In France, they are rounding up people coming home from this area and putting them straight in prison. Not all of them, but those they think have been affected by training on terrorism. And what apparently they've done is developed explosives that cannot be detected by the normal equipment in the airport. And some people are even having operations of putting the explosives inside themselves. Horrific to listen and hear about. But brothers and sisters, not the only thing that's frightening. Look at that. What's this? It's a disease, a virus. You can't use antibiotics against this. And it's spiralling out of control. This morning's news, they said, I think it was nearly 2,300 had died in the last 21 days. About 70% of all contracted, doesn't matter if they're in any hospital, they die. Horrific. Catastrophic loss of life is the potential. And it's growing by the minute. In country after country. Threatens Libya's national existence. That's one country. Serious threat, national existence, spreading like a wildfire. This was a few days, a day or so ago. 2,280, more this morning, have died from Ebola in Libya, Guinea and Sierra Leone, and so on. It's incredible what's going on. Here's the area that's in trouble, over on the western side of Africa. And the problem is, somebody contracts an illness and they can't move. What do you do with the person? Touch them, you get it. My dead body shall arise, resurrection. Awake and sing ye that dwell in the dust. For behold, the Lord cometh out of his place to punish the inhabitants of the earth for their iniquity. Now it cannot be dogmatic that this is the exact fulfilment of what it is, but they shall no more cover their slain. Do you know back in the close of World War I, flu virus came and spread. It killed more people than people who died in World War I. And in the southern part of New Zealand, on farms where people contracted that flu virus, nobody entered into the homes. They would put a flag up, the people who got it, put a flag up while they were well enough, saying, warning, don't come. When the flag was lowered, they knew it was safe to return. But if the flag did not get lowered, nobody went into the house. They were dead. Brothers and sisters, 40 odd million died in the close of World War I because of that. But now let's come on. Regional war looms. Jordan displays massive force on the Iraqi border. Why? She's terrified because the ISIS came to her border. So she got all of her troops and shot them up there to try and protect herself from it. But she realised she didn't have enough men. She didn't need to fear. America's been pouring troops into Jordan, and Israel has promised missile defence for Jordan, and if help is needed, she will come too, to oppose that ISIS threat. She apparently getting a fleet of drones ready. She said it would only take a month, and that was said about 2 months ago, that if needed, they would move in against these forces if they threaten places like Jordan and such like. So USA and Israel are in close communication with Jordan. They're close Israeli-American ally, Jordan. And I know this is a little dated, but it was an updated one that came only 2 days ago. Israel and Jordan has signed a $500 million natural gas, and the latest one is oil deal to supply Jordan with all that it needs. Israel and Jordan together. That's what we expect, isn't it? Look what we've expected. Even Edom and Moab and the chief of the children of Ammon. That's Jordan. They will be affiliated with the Tarshian power, won't they? And they will oppose Russia when Russia comes into the Middle East. He shall enter also into the glorious land. There's Russia. And many countries shall be overthrown. But these shall escape out of his hand. Jordan. And we have always believed that will be because they are allied to the Tarshian power. Now let's look at Israel. Israel, brethren and sisters, Netanyahu says we're never going to leave the West Bank. We've had it. We cannot have a Gaza in the West Bank. Look what happened when we gave Gaza to the Arabs back in 2005. We cannot leave. Otherwise the ISIS will sweep in, and the people in the West Bank are already willingly happy for the ISIS to get in there. So Israel said, we're going to stay. There will be a military presence in the West Bank, and that's not going to change. Otherwise they'll be sending missiles into Tel Aviv. We can't have that. And so they're moving on the West Bank already. They've taken up 2 large areas. And I believe the design of that is to break up the West Bank. So the people in that area have got to move through Jewish areas if they're trying to coordinate some sort of attack against Israel. Israel is moving to get control of that area totally. Is that a surprise? In the latter years, thou shalt come into the land that is gathered out of many people against the mountains of Israel. The West Bank is the mountains of Israel, isn't it? And upon the people that are gathered out of the nations that dwell in the midst of the land. Now see that word midst, it's used twice in the Bible. Next other time in Judges, I think it's Judges 7. Your margin, your Oxford margin has got a cross reference to it. And it's referred, the next verse, to the mountains of Israel, Judea. Yes, they will be there. Israel will control that. Of course they will. But as well as that, look at this, brethren and sisters. Here's Netanyahu. He's gone up into the Golan Heights to a hospital set up there. What for? Well, they've treated 900 Syrians over the last year or so while the fighting's going on. They're building goodwill across the Golan boundary with some of the troops, or some of the Syrians in there. And their aim is to form a buffer zone there that'll be pro-Israel. Another buffer zone down here that is pro-Israel. They're having troubles with that, but they're working on it. But what about their other neighbours? Arab leaders view Hamas as worse than Israel. Stay silent. 2 years ago, Israel found itself pressed from all sides by unfriendly Arab neighbours to end the fighting. Not this time. Egypt has led a new coalition of Arab states, including Jordan, Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates, and lined up with Israel. They can see how crazy this mob is. The people in Gaza, the Hamas, are affiliated with the ISIS type. Murderers and such like. They're madmen. We can't have that. So they're affiliated together with Israel. And so Gaza is becoming isolated at the south from Egypt, at the west by Jordan, at the east by Jordan, and so on. And Saudi Arabia is not sending any money to help them. They will dwell in unwalled villages at rest securely. Ultimately, how far away will that be? It could be any minute, but this is what Brother Thomas said. The return of security and prosperity to the tent, that's Israel, must either precede the development of us, the one Yahweh man, or be concurrent with the operations in the recesses of Timah at Sinai. So he says very simply, Christ comes, that peace will take place in the Middle East either just before Christ comes or shortly afterwards. And we're seeing the potential for it now. As the Gaza Strip area becomes isolated, Israel takes over that West Bank. Now, a little on Gaza. Here we can see the Gaza Strip area. Population, about twice the population of Adelaide. Area, 60 miles by 60 miles, 60 kilometres by 10 kilometres, 60 by 60, thereabouts. And GDP, very poor. No economy. Reason is, Israel, when they gave it to them, gave it a going economy. But the crazy Egyptian people of the Hamas moved in, and all the factories that were built by Israel, they just blew up. We can't have an Israeli one. They even blew up the sewage plant. And they had to then pump it outside into a big tank, which later on burst, and some of them got drowned in it. I do not lie. Crazy. Irrational people. But of course, now Israel is protected by its Iron Dome in the chaos that took place. Yes, they fired at all sorts of places. But Israel waited a whole week. How dare you defend yourself? After a week, she acted. And in went the rockets into the area of Gaza, into their main city. It was left in devastated condition. And we see a different policy altogether. Here they are, launching a missile from a hospital. Minor operations this way, military operations this way. It picks up the idea, doesn't it? That's what they're doing. Look at this. Israelis defence, Hamas's defence. They're firing missiles from middle of school grounds. No mistake about it. They did and they continued. So one of the key writers in America said this. My time's been gone, so here it is. Here's the difference between us, explains the Israeli Prime Minister. And he's quoting it, saying this is right. We're using missile defence to protect our civilians, and they're using their civilians to protect their missiles. Moral clarity. That's the truth, he's saying. They telephone people up, say we're going to bomb your building, then they drop a warning charge and then they hit it. Who's ever done that? Britain can see this. This man was the Foreign Minister of Britain. Gaza conflicts causes a split in the UK Parliament, the key leading party, Cameron's party. He stood down. This man was put in and immediately flew to Israel. The difference was over Israel. He didn't agree, you're out. Cameron said, you're in. And he came over and he said to Israel, we'll help you. What they meant, we don't know. But after that, Netanyahu said, an internationally supervised, demilitarised zone around Gaza is the only answer. We cannot allow weapons to go into this area. We must have an international framework for its demilitarisation. What did Brother Thomas say? Who will control Gaza? The power that comes into possession of Tyre and Zidon on the coast of Palestine is that which is in the area of Edom, Ammon and Moab. The latter day antagonists of Gog, Tarshish, Britain, or Commonwealth countries. Amazing. Amazing. The indications are that way. And now, another key sign, Israel. Look what's happening. Israel's transformation from a land of milk and honey into a land awash with oil and gas money. It's looking like it's becoming wealthy. We know that, don't we? Massive amounts of oil and natural gas. More than Saudi Arabia. Think of that. But as well as that, we haven't time to deal with the economy of Israel in detail. But young people over there, they come out of the army, they go into business, put their feet up and sit in front of a computer, work on it for maybe a couple of months, maybe a year or two, and then sell what they made, Viber, to Japan for 900 million. Not a bad kick-off, eh? 900 million. And there's a lot of that happening in Israel. Jews are behind all the key things in the computing world. Google, Facebook, you name it. And many of them come from Israel. What do we expect? To carry away silver and gold, cattle and goods. Economically strong and a good producer of food. They are producing food per acre, I think it is 18 times better than Australia. Per acre. And much of Israel, as many of you will know, is absolute dead waste. From Beersheba south. But brethren and sisters, as we look back over that, what have we seen? We've seen virtually everything we can think of has moved in the last 5 weeks. Dramatically moved ahead. What does it tell us? Are we watching? Are we ready? We don't know definitively when he's coming. But of that day and hour knoweth no man. Watch ye therefore, for ye know not the hour. In such an hour ye think not. He looketh for him. When he looketh for him. When he's not expecting him. But it shouldn't be for us. Shouldn't be like that for us, brothers and sisters. Why? Because look what the key point is. Watch therefore. Be ye ready. Watch therefore. Tell me, what do we have to hear now before Christ comes? Is there anything? Is there anything? Look at some of the other things just for a moment. You've seen this before. But there's been lunar eclipses, 4 of them, on a Jewish year, on 7 occasions since the time of Christ. Lunar eclipses. Look at the dates. Significant dates. Significant dates. And now, the last one is this. And already, by April the 15th, Russia was on the move. Israel was in chaos. Trouble was underway. So things have been moving dramatically through that period. Are we at the pivotal point? Here we are at the 8th one? Who knows? Who knows? That time is running out. We need to be deadly serious about the truth. Let me quote somebody. This man here is Luke Collier. In his book, he wrote an article in the Christadelphian under the heading Times and Seasons, which was reprinted, and this is where I got it from, the Testimony magazine in 2004. During the Second World War, he was editor of the Christadelphian. And he saw Russia join initially with Germany. And he thought, people wrote to him and said, looks like Rosh and Mago come together, perfect. Is this Christ's return? He said, no. Why not? Well, he said, first of all, we've got to be very careful with dates. So he wrote very cautiously, time periods. It's unwise to make very definite expression of opinion. Unwise to say, I definitely know when Christ returns. No man knows the day nor the hour, says the Scripture. He says, I'm not going to do that. But it's a worse error to be indifferent about dates. He said, if you want to know my opinion, he said, focus, help the Catholic Church, help them against some of the invading powers and help to establish it as a pseudo-political power, did so in the year 754 to 756. Okay? He said, if we add 1,260, that'd be my date. What it is, I don't know, but that's an inconsequential date. And we're in that period. Now, brothers and sisters and young people, we should take this very seriously. What does it mean? We need to be very earnest in our prayers. That our heart might be right with our God. That it might be transformed and changed by the influence of that word. And we need to be doing our daily readings and praying to God that it may have an impact upon us, so it has a deep, changing impact. So we become like Christ. We follow his example. We show that love of God's word, like the 10 virgins, the 5 faithful virgins. We apply ourselves in the truth, as did those ones who were in Matthew chapter 25. And we show a love and consideration for our brethren and sisters. As we look at those things, remember, the time could be short. We don't know. We cannot be definitive. It's unwise to say it is, but at the same time it's unwise to overlook it. How are we performing? What are we doing? Are we really being diligent about the truth? It could be tomorrow. September the 25th is Rosh Hashanah, the day of blowing of trumpets. Who knows? Is it this year? Is it next year? Is it the year after? We don't know, but it could be. And I've never in my life seen anything like the last 5 weeks. Well, let's conclude. So, here's our day. And there shall be upon the earth distress of nations, is there? With perplexity, no way out, is there? Men's hearts failing them for fear, Ebola, terrorism, is there? Of course there is. And for looking after those things which are coming on the earth, what's the answer? And he concludes, and when those things begin to come to pass, it could be coming to pass definitively in a few months' time, but it's when he begins, lift up your heads, for your redemption draweth nigh. Well, let's leave it there. But as you can see, the time is indeed very, very short. Let's pray that Christ's return will be here very soon. Thank you.